Some gemstones didn't lose value. They disappeared, not because demand faded, but because the world lost access. In the last century, major gemstones vanished from global trade when routes closed, borders shifted, mines depleted, or supply collapsed entirely. Some were removed for years, some for decades, and one became so rare it was effectively absent from commerce at all. This isn't mythology. It's documented market history. Over the next few minutes, we'll trace 4 stages of disappearance, from temporary removal to near geological impossibility. Because when access vanishes, value doesn't just change, it concentrates. Let's begin where disappearance usually starts, with movement. Ranked 10th. Baltic amber. When movement stops, markets follow. Disappearance does not always begin in the mine. Sometimes it begins at sea. Baltic amber has been traded for thousands of years, moving from northern Europe down through ancient corridors, once known as the Amber Road. Its deposits did not vanish in the 20th century. Demand did not collapse. Yet during the Second World War, large portions of its international circulation effectively froze. Ports closed. Shipping lanes were restricted. Cross-border commerce fractured. Amber did not cease to exist, but access to it did. That distinction defines this first stage of disappearance, when global conflict interrupts transport infrastructure. Materials dependent on concentrated routes are the first to be removed from international visibility. Baltic amber, heavily tied to the Baltic region's maritime networks, became difficult to move across continents. Dealers outside Europe experienced sharp supply gaps. International jewelry houses simply could not source it consistently. For collectors in distant markets, amber did not merely become scarce, it became absent. This was not geological depletion, it was logistical paralysis. And logistical paralysis can erase a gemstone from global trade just as effectively as exhaustion of a mine. Amber eventually returned to broader circulation once routes stabilized. But for a meaningful period, its presence in international commerce diminished dramatically. It became a regional material rather than a global one. That shift reveals something critical. A gemstone's visibility depends not only on rarity, but on mobility. When mobility collapses, even abundant materials can vanish from the market. Consider this carefully. If shipping lanes closed tomorrow, which gemstones would disappear first? The rarest ones, or the most geographically concentrated? Share that perspective below. Patterns of trade vulnerability often tell more about market structure than about mineral scarcity. Because Baltic amber teaches the opening lesson of disappearance. The first stones to vanish are not always the rarest. They are the ones that cannot move. And this is only the beginning. Ranked 9th, Burmese ruby. When borders close, markets shrink. If amber disappeared because movement stopped, Burmese ruby reveals a different mechanism. This time, the mines were still active. The stones still existed. Demand never weakened, but access was cut off. For generations, the Mogok region of Myanmar produced some of the most celebrated rubies in the world. Stones known for their intense pigeon blood color and exceptional saturation. Burmese origin became synonymous with top-tier quality in global auctions and high jewelry. Then, in 2008, the United States, at the time the largest luxury jewelry market, imposed an import ban on Burmese gemstones under the Tom Lantos bloc Burmese Jade Act. Almost overnight, Burmese rubies were removed from legal entry into one of the most influential consumer markets on Earth. The stones did not vanish geologically, they vanished commercially. For major jewelers operating within U.S. jurisdiction, Burmese ruby effectively ceased to exist as a tradable category. Inventory channels shifted. Dealers restructured sourcing. Some stones circulated through secondary markets abroad, but in the world's largest retail environment, Burmese ruby became absent from legitimate supply chains. That absence lasted until 2016. 8 years in global trade is not brief. In luxury markets, that span reshapes perception, inventory structures, and consumer awareness. Younger buyers entering the market during that period encountered Burmese ruby less frequently. Documentation shifted toward alternative origins. Visibility declined. This marks the second stage of disappearance, not logistical paralysis, but legal removal. A gemstone can remain abundant underground and still disappear from global commerce if regulatory access collapses. Consider this carefully. If a single major market closes its doors to a gemstone, does that stone truly remain global? Trade history suggests that market size matters as much as geology. If insight from the jewelry industry or auction archives reveals how quickly origin-based supply can contract under restriction, share that perspective below. Structural removal from one dominant market can reshape global perception more than scarcity itself. Because Burmese ruby teaches the next lesson in disappearance. A gemstone does not need to run out to vanish. Sometimes a border is enough, and the mechanisms of disappearance are only becoming more permanent. Ranked 8th, Afghan lapis lazuli, when instability becomes structural. If Burmese ruby showed how a border can remove a gemstone from a major market, Afghan lapis lazuli reveals something more complex. This is not a single ban, not a temporary wartime freeze, but repeated structural interruption. For more than 6,000 years, the most prized lapis lazuli has come from the Badakhshan region of Afghanistan. Ancient Egyptian amulets, Renaissance, ultramarine pigment, royal seals, many trace back to those mountain deposits. Few gemstones have a longer documented trade history. Yet in modern times, that continuity fractured. During prolonged periods of regional instability, export channels narrowed, informal mining increased, and legal trade pathways weakened. At various points over the past decades, international buyers faced severe difficulty sourcing verifiable Afghan lapis through stable commercial routes. The stone did not vanish geologically, it vanished in reliability. Major international jewelry houses require documented origin, consistent supply, and stable export frameworks. When those conditions deteriorate, visibility declines. Even if lapis continued circulating regionally, its presence within formal global trade systems diminished. And when formal trade disappears, perception shifts. This marks a deeper stage of disappearance than simple market restriction. Amber was halted by movement. Burmese ruby was halted by law. Afghan lapis was constrained by structural instability. The result is subtler but powerful. When sourcing becomes unpredictable, global commerce retreats. Buyers shift toward alternative materials with clearer documentation. Auction catalogs mention origin less confidently. Institutional demand softens. Over time, that softening resembles absence. Consider this carefully. Does a gemstone disappear only when it cannot be mined, or when it can no longer be traded transparently? Global markets rely on trust as much as supply. When verification becomes uncertain, even ancient materials can recede from international prominence. If experience in trade certification, or auction observations suggests additional patterns in how origin instability reshapes visibility. Share that insight below. Structural disruption often leaves quieter but longer-lasting footprints than outright bans. Because Afghan lapis lazuli teaches the next principle of disappearance. A gemstone does not need to be illegal to fade. It only needs to become uncertain. And the mechanisms ahead are even less reversible. Ranked 7th, Kashmir sapphire. When the mine falls silent. If Afghan lapis faded through instability, Kashmir sapphire disappeared through exhaustion. Not political removal, not export bans, not trade route collapse. Geology. In the late 19th century, high in the Himalayas, miners uncovered sapphires unlike anything the market had seen before. Their color was not merely blue, it was velvety, soft, almost luminous. Stones from the Kashmir region quickly established a new global benchmark. And then, within a few decades, the supply dwindled. By the early 20th century, meaningful commercial mining had effectively ceased. The deposits that produced the legendary material were either depleted or no longer viable at scale. Unlike other sapphire sources in Sri Lanka or Myanmar, Kashmir did not maintain long-term production. The result was subtle but decisive. Kashmir sapphire did not disappear from existence. It disappeared from new supply. From that point forward, every Kashmir sapphire entering the market was old stock, inherited, auctioned, or resold. No fresh production replenished global inventories. That shift changes how a gemstone functions within trade. A material still being mined participates in commerce. A material no longer produced becomes archival. Over time, Kashmir sapphire transformed from an active trade commodity into a collector's category. It moved from retail pipelines into auction houses. It shifted from steady circulation into episodic appearance. An episodic appearance resembles absence. In mainstream global jewelry markets, Kashmir sapphire ceased to be a sourcing option. Designers could not reliably procure it. Dealers could not reorder it. Jewelers could not promise it. This marks a new stage in disappearance. Amber was halted by movement. Burmese ruby was halted by law. Afghan lapis was weakened by instability. Kashmir sapphire was halted by depletion. No regulation can reverse exhaustion. When a primary source runs dry, the market adapts, but the category changes permanently. Consider this carefully. When a gemstone stops being produced, does it remain part of global trade, or does it transition into history? Auction records suggest that once active mining ends, visibility contracts to the highest tiers of the market. For most of the world, the stone effectively disappears. If observation of high-end auctions or historical gemstone benchmarks reveals how source depletion reshapes long-term trade presence, share that insight below. The difference between scarcity and cessation is often underestimated because Kashmir sapphire teaches a decisive principle of disappearance. When the mine falls silent, the market does not argue. It adjusts, and the next stage becomes even less reversible. Ranked 6th, Golconda diamond. When a source becomes legend. If Kashmir sapphire fell silent through depletion, Golconda diamonds represent something even more final. The source did not merely slow, it ended. For centuries, the Golconda region of India produced diamonds that defined global standards of clarity and transparency. Before major African discoveries in the 19th century, nearly all of the world's known diamonds came from India, and Golconda stones were considered the finest among them. Some of the most storied diamonds in history trace back to those mines. Then, the deposits declined. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Golconda's primary diamond fields were largely exhausted. Large-scale commercial extraction ceased to define the region. New global supply shifted to Brazil and later to South Africa. Golconda did not disappear from history. It disappeared from production. And that distinction matters. When a mining region that once dominated global output stops yielding commercial quantities, the category transforms. Golconda diamond no longer refers to a steady supply chain. It becomes a provenance label attached only to stones already in circulation. There is no replenishment. Every Golconda diamond that appears today originates from historical extraction. There are no new discoveries feeding the market in meaningful volume. No contemporary pipeline sustaining global distribution. In active trade terms, that is disappearance. The name remains powerful in auctions. The stones remain treasured. But the source itself is no longer part of global mining commerce. This marks a turning point in the pattern of vanishing. Amber was halted by movement. Burmese ruby by law. Afghan lapis by instability. Kashmir sapphire by depletion. Golconda represents exhaustion at the source level, a former global supplier reduced to legacy. And legacy does not behave like active trade. Consider this carefully. When a region that once defined an industry stops producing entirely, does it remain part of global commerce? Or does it shift into mythology? Auction houses still celebrate Golconda provenance, but for everyday global trade, the source no longer exists. If long-term observation of diamond markets reveals how origin labels evolve once production ceases, share that perspective below. The transition from supply region to historical footnote often reshapes entire industries. Because Golconda teaches a decisive principle of disappearance. When a source becomes legend, commerce becomes memory, and the next stage moves from historical exhaustion to modern collapse. Ranked fifth, Brazilian Imperial Topaz. When quality collapses before quantity. Not every disappearance is dramatic. Some happen quietly, through decline. Brazilian Imperial Topaz, particularly from the Ouro Preto region, once defined the global benchmark for this rare orange to rosy variety of topaz. Its saturated hues and relative clarity placed it in a category far above common topaz material found elsewhere. For decades, fine imperial stones flowed steadily into international jewelry markets. Then something changed. Production did not stop overnight. Mines did not suddenly close. Instead, the highest quality material began appearing less frequently. Output continued, but the top tier thinned. In gemstone markets, that distinction matters more than raw tonnage. Commercial trade is driven by quality consistency. Jewelers require reliable access to stones that meet established color and clarity standards. When top-grade production declines significantly, the category begins to retreat from mainstream visibility. Imperial topaz did not vanish completely. It retreated into scarcity. Over time, fewer exceptional stones entered global pipelines. Designers shifted attention to more consistently available materials. Retailers reduced offerings. What was once a recognized sourcing option became a collector's pursuit. This is a different form of disappearance. Amber was halted by movement. Burmese ruby by law. Afghan lapis by instability. Kashmir sapphire by exhaustion. Golconda by historic depletion. Imperial topaz faded through quality collapse. The mine still produces, but not at the level the market once relied upon. And when top-grade output becomes unpredictable, global trade recalibrates. A gemstone can remain technically available, yet effectively absent from high-level commerce. Consider this carefully. When a material no longer delivers consistent excellence, does it remain part of international trade, or does it drift toward obscurity? Auction records show that exceptional imperial topaz still commands attention. But in broader jewelry markets, its presence has narrowed dramatically compared to earlier decades. If long-term observation of production trends suggests other gemstones that experience similar quality contraction, share that insight below. The difference between available and viable often determines market survival. Because Brazilian imperial topaz demonstrates a subtle but decisive principle. Disappearance does not always mean empty mines. Sometimes it means the best material stopped coming out. And from here, the mechanisms of vanishing grow even more absolute. Ranked fourth, red beryl, when rarity becomes commercial silence. Some gemstones disappear loudly, others fade into near invisibility. Red beryl belongs to the second category. Discovered in Utah's Wawa Mountains, red beryl, sometimes marketed as bixbite, is one of the rarest gem-quality minerals ever found in consistent crystal form. Unlike emerald or aquamarine, which share the same beryl family but are mined globally, red beryl's commercial deposits are confined to an extraordinarily small geographic zone. That concentration alone makes it fragile in trade. But the deeper issue is scale. Red beryl has never existed in large commercial volume. Even during its most productive years, only small quantities of gem-quality material entered the market. Mining operations were limited. Crystal sizes were modest. Clean stones above 1 carat were uncommon. Then production slowed further. When small-scale extraction meets geological rarity, output can drop to levels that are technically ongoing, but commercially irrelevant. Dealers cannot build supply chains around sporadic, microscopic availability. Jewelers cannot base collections on stones that appear unpredictably and in minimal sizes. At that point, global trade does not formally ban the stone, it simply stops counting on it. Red beryl illustrates a critical threshold in disappearance. Amber vanished through movement. Burmese ruby through legal restriction. Afghan lapis through instability. Kashmir sapphire through depletion. Golconda through historic exhaustion. Imperial topaz through quality contraction. Red beryl vanishes through insufficient scale. There is a difference between rarity and absence. Rarity can drive value. Insufficient commercial volume erases visibility. Today, red beryl still exists. Mining has not completely ceased, but its presence in mainstream global jewelry trade is minimal to the point of near commercial silence. Most buyers encounter it through specialized collectors, not retail channels. Consider this carefully. When a gemstone is so rare that reliable supply chains cannot form, does it truly participate in global trade? Auction appearances do not equal circulation. If experience with niche gemstone markets suggests similar cases where extreme rarity limits commercial viability, share that perspective below. The boundary between collectible and tradable is often narrower than it appears. Because red beryl teaches a sobering principle. A gemstone can exist and still disappear. And from here, the mechanisms shift from geological limits to market replacement itself. Ranked third, natural alexandrite, when the market replaces the original. Some gemstones disappear because mines close. Others disappear because markets move on. Natural alexandrite is one of the clearest examples. Discovered in Russia's Ural Mountains in the 19th century, Alexandrite stunned the gem world with its dramatic color change: green in daylight, red under incandescent light. The phenomenon felt almost theatrical. It quickly became associated with Imperial Russia and elite European jewelry houses. But the original Russian deposits were limited. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, production from the Urals had diminished significantly. Smaller sources were later discovered in Brazil, Sri Lanka, and East Africa, yet high-quality natural alexandrite remained rare. Then the market introduced something new. Synthetic alexandrite entered commercial circulation in the mid-20th century. For the first time, consumers could purchase a stone with dramatic color change at accessible price points and consistent availability. The effect was not immediate disappearance. It was gradual replacement. Retail jewelers could now offer alexandrite without relying on unpredictable natural supply. Buyers unfamiliar with geological nuance encountered the synthetic version more often than the original. Over time, for many segments of the market, alexandrite no longer implied natural origin. Natural alexandrite did not vanish from existence. It faded from mainstream visibility. This represents a new stage in the pattern of disappearance. Amber was halted by movement, Burmese ruby by restriction, Afghan lapis by instability, Kashmir sapphire by depletion, Golconda by historical exhaustion, Imperial topaz by quality contraction, red beryl by insufficient scale. Alexandrite was overshadowed. When synthetic alternatives achieve scale, affordability, and visual similarity, natural material can retreat into specialist circles. Auction houses still celebrate fine natural alexandrite. Collectors still compete for exceptional stones. But in broad global jewelry trade, the natural category became niche. Consider this carefully. When a lab-grown version dominates availability, does the natural original remain part of global commerce? Or does it shift into connoisseur territory? Replacement does not require extinction. It requires substitution at scale. If long-term observation of gemstone markets reveals other materials where synthetic production reshaped visibility, share that insight below. Market displacement often occurs quietly, without formal bans or mine closures. Because natural alexandrite demonstrates a pivotal principle. A gemstone can disappear not because it ran out, but because the market found another way to make it. And the final two stones vanish for reasons even more absolute. Ranked second, Paraíba tourmaline, when a discovery burns out. Some gemstones fade slowly. Paraíba tourmaline did not. Discovered in the late 1980s in the Brazilian state of Paraíba, this copper-bearing tourmaline stunned the market with an electric neon glow unlike anything seen before. Its vivid blue to green luminescence appeared almost internally lit. Within a few short years, it transformed high jewelry design worldwide. And then production declined sharply. The original Brazilian deposits were small and geologically unusual. Extraction was difficult. Output was limited from the beginning. But as global demand accelerated, supply could not keep pace. Within a relatively short period, meaningful commercial production from the original Brazilian locality diminished to extremely low levels. The market did not collapse. The source did. This created a peculiar disappearance. Designers still wanted the stone. Collectors still sought the color. But the defining Brazilian origin became scarce to the point of near invisibility in regular trade. Later, copper-bearing tourmalines were discovered in Africa, particularly in Mozambique and Nigeria. These stones helped restore broader availability under the Paraíba type category. Yet purists and high-end auction houses continued distinguishing original Brazilian material from later finds. In practical terms, the Brazilian Paraíba that ignited global demand had largely vanished from commercial mining. This is a different kind of disappearance, not prohibition, not instability, not gradual depletion over centuries, but rapid burnout following intense discovery-driven demand. Amber was halted by movement, Burmese ruby by borders, Afghan lapis by structural fragility, Kashmir sapphire by exhaustion, Golconda by historical depletion, imperial topaz by quality decline, red beryl by insufficient scale, natural alexandrite by substitution. Paraíba tourmaline reveals what happens when a small deposit meets explosive global attention. Discovery can accelerate disappearance. Consider this carefully. When a gemstone is defined by a single breakthrough locality, what happens when that locality cannot sustain production? The category survives. The origin does not. Auction records now treat original Brazilian Paraíba stones as a distinct tier, separated from later sources. In global commerce, the defining birthplace has largely transitioned from active mining region to historical benchmark. If observation of modern gemstone discoveries suggests other cases where initial excitement outpaced geological capacity, share that insight below. Rapid emergence often carries rapid contraction. Because Paraíba tourmaline teaches a powerful principle, a gemstone can dominate the market and still disappear in a single generation. And the final stone did not burn out quickly. It was barely there to begin with. In first place, painite, when supply was almost theoretical. Some gemstones disappeared because borders closed, some because mines ran dry. Painite nearly vanished because it was barely there to begin with. First identified in the 1950s from material discovered in Myanmar, painite was once listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the rarest gemstone on Earth. For decades, only a handful of crystals were known to exist. Fewer still were fastable. This was not a case of trade disruption. It was geological minimalism. For much of the late 20th century, painite did not meaningfully participate in global gemstone commerce. There were no steady supply chains, no commercial mining operations producing consistent parcels, no regular auction listings. In practical terms, it was absent from trade. Collectors knew the name. Dealers rarely saw the stone. Jewelry houses could not source it. That is disappearance in its most absolute form. Unlike Kashmir sapphire or Golconda diamond, painite was not a former giant reduced to legacy status. It never occupied mainstream global trade at all. Its rarity placed it outside commercial circulation from the beginning. Only in the early 2000s did additional deposits surface in Myanmar, modestly increasing availability. Even then, gem-quality material remained extremely limited. Painite transitioned from almost unknown to exceptionally rare, but it never became widely accessible in global jewelry markets. This marks the final stage of disappearance in the flow. Amber vanished through logistics, Burmese ruby through restriction, Afghan lapis through instability, Kashmir sapphire through depletion, Golconda through historical exhaustion, imperial topaz through quality collapse, red beryl through insufficient scale, natural alexandrite through replacement, Paraíba tourmaline through rapid burnout. Painite represents geological scarcity at the edge of commerce. It demonstrates a principle few markets acknowledge. A gemstone does not need to be banned, depleted, or replaced to disappear. It simply needs to exist in quantities too small for trade to form around it. Consider this carefully. When a mineral is so rare that commercial infrastructure never develops, does it belong to global trade or to geological record? Even today, painite remains more a collector's phenomenon than a retail category. Its name carries mystique precisely because it hovered outside the market for so long. And that is the most absolute form of disappearance, not fading from commerce, but never fully entering it at scale. Gemstones do not disappear because they lose beauty. They disappear when access breaks, when ships stop, when borders close, when mines fall silent, when supply never scales. Trade depends on movement, and movement is fragile. The next time a gemstone seems permanent, consider this. Is it rare or simply well-connected? Because in global markets, what endures is not only what exists, it's what can circulate.